Hello guys. I welcome you to today's discussion. Today I want us to look at the increase in the volume of slave trade in the 18th century. And so I want us to look at basically the various reasons that led to the increase in the volume of the slave trade in the 18th century. Before we begin with today's discussion, I would urge you to subscribe to the channel and also recommend it to your friends to also do the same. Yes, today I'm recording in the evening. Good. Now let's begin with our discussions for today. You see, we have been looking at the last video I uploaded was on the organization of the slave trade, and we saw how the slave trade was organized. Today, in the 18th century, if we look at the beginning of the slave trade from somewhere, of course, with the Portuguese arrival somewhere in 42 to 1492 thereabout. When you look at from that time or from that period up to the 18th century, where we have 1700 to 1799, that period, that 1700 to 1799 or 1800, the 18th century period, saw great increase in the volume of slaves, Africans who were taken abroad. And we are going to look at the reasons that accounted for that increase. Now, this century, of course, the 18th century, which saw by far the largest number of slave Africans taken in Europe, into Europe, and then also into the New World ships. Almost every region of the Atlantic Africa was affected. You understand? Areas which saw a particular expansion included Sierra Leone, and of course in the Gold Coast. And this was primarily because of the rise of the Asante as at that time in the Gold Coast, and also now Congo Brazzaville. These areas experienced, you know, a lot of slaves being taken from Africa to the New World and other European countries. So today, I mean, basically, we are looking, or we're going to look at the reasons that led to that increase in the volume of the slave trade. So let's begin with let's begin with our objectives for today. So our objectives for today is that by the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain, if you are asked to explain why the slave trade increased in volume during the 18th century, you should be able to do that. And again, you should be able to account for the shift from gold to slave trade in Ghana during the 18th century. So the reasons why a lot of people moved away from the trade in gold to the trade in slaves. This, they are all the same, they are all same points that we are going to look at, but it depends on how you would answer each of them. Both of these objectives have the same content, but it depends on how well you argue out in your essay. So let's begin with the first one. But before we begin with any of these reasons, I have some pictures here that I would like to show to you. When you look at this woman here, whom you see breastfeeding, these were of course some of the works of the slaves. Like some of them were nannies. They were actually taking care of the white, uh, I mean children, especially elder the elder ones. Okay. Now this here I mean we call it branding. Branding in the sense that each slave master had to give a symbol or brand his or her slave, so that in case he or she gets missing, he he can identify him, because the white saw it was, I mean, it was quite difficult for the white to distinguish, between us. And so very often they will give you a mark, of course, which we call branding, and this is what has translated into a tattoo today. It could be done at any part of your body. Okay, and this, as you have seen here, this man is also a stubborn slave who has been shipped, as you have seen over there. And these were some of the tools, some of the punishments that were meted out to the slave, should in case they rebelled, against their masters. And these were some of the flyers or the posters which were being, posted, on trees, on walls, advertising for slaves. So if you see here, we have Negroes for hire, and we've already said that the Negroes refer to the black Africans. So Negroes for hire, as you have seen here. So you can also hire your slave off to another, compatriot who wants the services of a slave. You can hire the slave out, then you take your money. By the time you steal, the 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 slave master will return you back to the owner. So as you have seen here, on Wednesday, April, of course, 17th, and we have their names there. A woman from 40 to 50 years, and we have some France also here, a young woman with her infant. So these are the specifications, of the commodities that you are going to buy. We also have Taylor, a boy about 11 years old, and then Lawson, also a boy about 12 years old. And therefore, if you want to acquire some of these commodities or slaves, then you should know the ones that you are actually going in for. Then we also have slaves to be sold and let. So some were sold, some were also let, and this, I'm sure, was when the slaves actually came from the new world. Then you have these posters, of course, slave to be sold and let off. Good. So let's start with what we are supposed to do today, the reason for the shift of the goal. So as I have already indicated, it is obvious from the various records that we have that during the 18th century, more enslaved Africans were forcefully taken or transported to the new world, more than in any of the centuries, from the 13th century, because that the slave trade, or 14th century the slave trade began. The 18th century saw large number of Africans being transported into the new world, and as a result of the increase in the slave trade, many Ghanaians, many West Africans actually shifted from the trade in gold with the Europeans to the selling of slaves. So earlier earlier at the beginning, the people traded in gold, you understand, but with the increase, some reasons accounted for that increase, and so a lot of people were now moving away from the sell, of course, the trade in gold to the trade in slaves, and we that is what we are going to look at. So we are going to look at the various reasons that accounted for that increase, that shift from people moving away from the sale of, from the trade in gold to the trade in what? In slaves. And that is what, of course, basically we are going to look at. Good. So let's begin with the first uh, reason for this shift. Now, there was the first reason was the increase in demand of slaves in the New World. You know, before, Gonzalez and co were sending slaves to, like Portugal. At the beginning, slaves were not in high demand. Slaves were in high demand because of the labor that they provided for their various masters. Now, during the 16th century, some Europeans, especially the Spanish, they settled in the New World, and they established large plantations, sugar plantations, sugar cane, cotton, and all of that, in the Americas, especially, the US, Caribbean, Brazil, you know, all those North and South American, of course, countries. And therefore, they needed these Negroes to work in these plantations that they had, of course, cultivated. So Spain, for instance, with the exploration of Columbus, discovering, of course, the New World for Spain. Spain virtually took over the whole of Latin America, with the exception of Brazil, which was taken by Portugal. Almost all the other countries in Latin America, that's South America, Mexico and co. Peru, of course, were all taken. Chile were all taken by Spain. And so these European settlers who settled in the Americas established these plantations, and these cotton and sugar and tobacco and all of that, they need high labor, you need strong men to what to actually work in them. Initially, they were using the local Indians that they met, the indigenous people that lived in North America, that we call the Inca, the Maya, and so people. But later, these people were not strong enough for the kind of labor that these plantations needed, and the Africans, proved to be really strong. Don't forget that we have already said that in the Asiento Treaty, Spain requested, or Portugal was to export was slaves to Spanish colonies. And so with that, the Africans proved to be more stronger, for the work. And so Spain themselves then decided to actually acquire Africans directly, or slaves directly from the source, that is from Africa, instead of getting it from Portugal. And that led to the increase in demand of slaves in the 14th, in the 18th century. Sorry. Then again, the lucrative nature of the trade also attracted a lot of people to move away from the selling of gold to the slave trade. The slave trade was so lucrative. There was so much profit in it. You didn't need much capital or much time, or like unlike gold, you have to go dig, a lot of work. Slave trade, all that you needed was some kind of tools or some equipment to just go and raid, you know and you have your cash. So it was the quickest way of getting money, and many European merchants entered into the slave trade. The European merchants who were actually coming in, the European traders who were actually coming in, saw that their counterparts were making a lot of money from the buying and the selling of slaves abroad. And so a lot of these Europeans also entered into the slaves. Okay, and of course, like I said, capital, you didn't need much capital to begin to trade in slaves, because the thing that they were bringing, it wasn't anything that extraordinary. Right? So against this background, the profits were very, very rewarding, and so a lot of the European traders actually got involved in the trade. And the more, of course, a lot of people are trading capital, of course, bringing in items and all of that. Really, a lot of people, a lot of Africans will be enslaved, and then there will be a lot of raids, there will be a lot of wars in Africa in order to get slaves for the large or teeming, of course, increasing number of European traders that were actually getting involved in the trade. Good. Also, the introduction of also firearms also increased the volume of trade, or the volume of slaves in the 18th century. So with the introduction of more firearms by these foreigners, some ambitious, some unscrupulous Ghanaian chiefs used them to attack the less powerful states around them, with the hope of getting more slaves to satisfy the insatiable of course demand of the Europeans. We all human beings can be perfect. So with the introduction of firearms and gun ammunition by the Europeans, some African chiefs actually, who were irresponsible, getting access to these guns, used them on the less powerful states, raided them, attacked them, so that they can, capture them as war prisoners, and then later sell them back to the Europeans as well as slaves. And that really also, led to the increase in the demand, or the increase in the transportation of the slaves to the new world. Good. So let's continue with that. Again, we saw another reason for the increase in the volume of slave trade in the 18th century was also the invention of the steamship, which before the 18th century had not been invented. Now, when you look at the images here, this first ship is what we call the sail ship, and this is what we call the steam ship. Now, this ship, it's not large, as you can see the two of them. The sail ship is smaller. The steamship is very, very larger than the sail ship. When we also look at the number of slaves that this steam I mean this sail ship can take. It will be less than the number of slaves that this steamship can what? Take. Now, this sail ship, of course, uses the wind to move. This one has a steam that moves it. And so you can imagine how faster this one will go. This one can reach Europe maybe in a month, but this one will take like 2 months to reach, of course, Europe. All right. And so the invention of the steamship also, came to increase the volume of slave trade, or I mean the volume of slaves that were being transported annually to the new world, because these steamships were very large. They could carry large volume of cargoes. They could they ran very fast. They were very speedier. They ran very fast than the sail ship that were being used to you know at the beginning. And so that would actually meant that first, if they were taking say 50 slaves here, with this steamship it can take like 150. And the volume of the slaves are going to be increased. The transportation are going to be increased. So the invention of the steamship also really, did that. Also, the persistent intertribal wars also led to something that also led to the volume of the slave trade, and that was the shortage of gold. There were a lot of intertribal wars among the people who were actually engaged in the gold production in Ghana. And so, if there were wars as a result of the introduction of the firearms, a lot of people could not actually go out there to go and mine for gold. Okay, and therefore, gold, or I mean, the production of gold declined. And so, even traders or European traders who came in to purchase or to trade in gold, were became disappointed because they didn't get they will not get the required amount of gold that they need because of the intertribal wars that of course hampered the production of gold. And so people now then shifted from the gold trade to the European trade, I mean to the slave trade, since they were not getting the kind of gold that they actually needed or wanted from the Africans. And that also led to the increase in the volume of the slave trade. Then we also have heavy capital, of course, heavy capital investment in um, the slave trade. Investment in the trade by British and Dutch of course capitalists. These two European countries had rich capitalists because they were forerunners of the Industrial Revolution, which had, spearheaded the production of goods and services. Now, this Industrial Revolution had actually also come with surplus fund, surplus profit. They were able to have a lot of profit to the extent that they needed, I mean, some areas to actually invest these surplus, profit, so that they can get more, more money. And so, with the Industrial Revolution, that actually also brought about with it surplus profit, more profit, and so the Europeans needed other other new markets to invest, and they found the slave trade as a more lucrative trade to invest in as at that time in the 18th century. And so because of that, they actually decided to get involved in the slave trade. Good, good, good. We've had a very interesting discussion today. Thank you for your time. And before I leave you, if you have any question, anything, just take my contact, and let's have a chit chat. Um, Subscribe to the channel and Wasi History. We are here to give you more educative and also exciting content. If you also have any content, any assignment, anything that you want us to talk about the history of Africa and